All right, you're welcome back. After collapsing 6 times in the first 8 days of this year, 2018, Nigeria's electricity grid again collapsed on February the 1st, making it the 7th so far.
Sadly indeed. Well, between January the 2nd and 3rd, the country's electricity grid collapsed, leaving many parts of the country in total blackout. Now, Nigerians were not slow in responding to the electricity crisis, as they took to different social media platforms to complain about the national blackout.
Now, when will the enormous problems in Nigeria's power sector be resolved? That question and many others will be asking the former chairman of Nigeria Electricity Regulatory Commission, NERC, in the person of Dr. Sam Amadi. Good morning, and it's good to have you. Of course, Dr. Sam Amadi is in our Abuja studio. All right, so let's put it this way. In 2 decades, 20 years, Nigeria has spent close to, if not more than $20 billion, yet it still faces the challenge of darkness all across the country. What exactly is at the root of those problems? Of course, we've heard about this grid collapses over time. This year alone, about 9 collapses already. What exactly is going on?
Well, first, in context, we've spent quite a lot of money, but we've not spent this money enough and strategically. Don't forget that we got first grid power in Lagos in 1896, thereabout, and since then, up until 2000, we had less than 2,000 or 2,500 megawatts in the grid. So we've not done systematic investment over the years, and that was the background to the power sector reform. That's one. Secondly, some of these investments also, in the days past, we were not strategic. We were not sure how much of them went to actually improve the network. And we've not been maintaining the network up until perhaps very recently after the power sector reform. So essentially, all these factors mean that our network is historically fragile, collapsed in the year 2001, 2002, before we got it back somehow. And still today, our network is almost is totally dilapidated. And so the work we are doing should not create impression, even what the government is doing now, that we are anywhere near some degree of significant reliability. So essentially, we were ground zero, we collapsed. And what that means that we need sustained, intense investment and change management over time. I don't know what's over time, whether it's 5 years, 10 years, to get the grid to a reasonable level of reliability and stability. Oftentimes, we politicize some achievements. Sometimes we say 5,000, 4,000, 7,000, 8,000 megawatts. Those are momentary peaks, but essentially, we are not far off from where we were before. We've done some things right, but essentially what we're doing needs time, needs energy, intensity to constitute a new normal. The normal today is that the grid is unstable, unreliable, and so we still get back to collapses. It's unfortunate that 6, 7 in just a few months is too much, but essentially we used to have collapse in the past, only that sometimes we are better at managing the technical side of it, including having enough reserves, spinning reserves to sustain occasional crisis. But these days, perhaps we are using up all our reserves, and such that when there is a problem, we have low level of tolerance to withstand it. So there are many technical factors, but the bottom line is it tells us that we are very far from stability.
All right. Since the Olusegun Obasanjo administration till now, about I can't remember what the figures now, but I know at least trillions of naira have been spent on that sector, and yet Nigerians are paying
$16 billion, as a matter of fact.
Hugely, yeah, what is the equivalent in naira? Yeah. Hugely for darkness, really. From what you just said now, many would have thought that after the reform of the energy sector, that electricity supply should have improved, but instead, from what you said, it's even worse. So what are they not getting right now that it was still somehow in place before the reform?
Yeah, you're right. People should be discouraged that we don't have improved power supply. But essentially, what are they not getting right? I think 3 things in my view. First is that perhaps the level of private sector investment we expected into the sector when we unbundled and privatized, we're not getting it. And I did point out when I was chairman of NEC in an interview that we are too optimistic about what the private sector can do. It earned me significant challenge from the minister then. It earned me attack from people in BPE and the ministry, because my view has always been that from the literature of privatization, and I wrote a book on that before I became chairman of NEC, that is rarely done well. The expectations are always misplaced. People think that once you reform, the private sector will come with all the finances and bingo, in few days you are up to speed. But that's not going to happen. There's still so much risk that the private sector will not come and invest. So we are expecting so much money into the transmission network, some from government, some from the Exim, China Exim and other Eurobond money, but also from private sector. We've not yet concessioned or moved to privatizing. And also at the same time, I don't think we are putting enough money into the grid because, of course, there are so much challenge on public financing. The idea of privatizing is that you're going to have private sector funded to reduce the public sector borrowing requirement of government so they can deal with other issues. But that's not happening very well. So that's number one. Number two, the managerial capability that perhaps the reason why we brought the transmission company from Canada, the Manitoba, to manage the network, we perhaps need a lot more on managerial change management. We are probably not effectively managing the grid, notwithstanding the challenges of financing and on grid reliability. And the third reason also would be that you probably need to be patient and basically change the network significantly, put in new networks, change lines and all that, so that level of reliability will be high. We are doing three things at a time. We are increasing generation. We want to ramp up generation because we are very low generation. We also want to improve distribution at the same time. I want to improve transmission. The three value chains have been historically bad. So if you're going to do, it's like perfect game. You want to balance all the balls at the same time. If you're not skillful, if you're not focused enough, some balls will drop. And so that's what we're getting to. We are doing so much with so little capacity, so little financing. And this is really where I think that expectations are going faster than capability. Basically, there is a capability gap here. We just can't fix all these things within the time frame that our politics seem to suggest to people that, hold a minute, we are coming up with solutions. It will take time. We don't have the financing. We have to make
all right,
more
Dr.
Amadi,
you talk about
private sector.
If I may jump in very quickly, because we hardly have enough time. Let's talk about the grid that you say we need to pump more money into the national grid. Is it a case of pumping more money into the national grid that has been collapsing over and over and over again? Or, as some experts have recommended, there's a need to set up another line entirely, and some are saying that the line between Benin and Lagos, Benin and Omotosho, that is really the axis where this collapses actually happen, and there is a need for another line along that axis so that we can have, a sustainable solution to this problem. Do you agree with them?
Sure. Yeah, I think so. We know that that's the heartbeat of the transmission network. But the point is, if you're going to build a new line, that's financing. If you're going to replace that line, that's financing. The point I'm making is that you can start with first. Why don't we, at this time, think about regionalizing the grid? We can do some kind of unbundling of the grid, create commercial incentive for operators to invest in improving those grids so that we don't have a national grid that does not work. So you can have a regional grid, some are working, so you incentivize competition. Essentially, don't forget that this is a value chain. If the discos are not recovering money, if the tariff is not good, it will percolate down to transmission, because you need transmission fees to finance transmission network, even by private sector. So basically, our system is still very, very unreliable. Investment is still low, and then the commerciality is still very low. And so we have to do a lot of, rolling the dice all at the same time, hitting the balls all at the same time. My worry is that we are on a run-up to election, and we'll see greater politicizing. The officials would like to sex up the facts, but the truth is that we are far from stability.
Okay,
the guy
Doctor.
working hard, They need to work harder, more investment from all the sectors. Yeah.
Dr. Amadi, from what you just suggested, that there is need to unbundle the grid and to commercialize it for effective operation. But then wouldn't you say that it all boils down to political will, knowing that since the privatization of the power sector, pretty nothing
progress has
been achieved?
Yeah.
Well, I agree with you. When we were there, it was also political will. People were not free to do all they ought to do. But the point is this. If you look at our grid, this is a large country. And people have argued, why should we have only one national grid? Why don't we have some regional grids? It has its own costs and problems. Some people argue that some part of Nigeria might be trapped in very, very terrible power supply because you need more investment and time to ramp up the capacity of the regional grid. But the point I'm trying to say is this. We have a problem. We should combine both investment and policy change as well as change management. If you regionalize the grid, it doesn't necessarily mean you have to commercialize it, privatize it. You can regionalize it and concession it perhaps, but create strong public sector oversight. But the idea is that there should be a sense in which you mainstream efficiency and commerciality in the use of the grid. Otherwise, you will not be able to raise the financing to periodically maintain and upgrade the grid to serve growing energy demand and, of course, we hope growing energy supply in the future.
How do we solve the gas problem? We hear that Nigeria actually has enough gas to provide 40,000 megawatts of electricity for the next 60 years.
Yes.
And yet we're not able to, fix this problem. How can we fix it very quickly?
Well, it's just the same way of saying Nigeria is such a rich country, but we don't have roads, we don't have hospitals, we don't have anything. The problem is this. They have two problems of gas supply. One is the commerciality of it, which we have improved. Second is the issue that the pipelines, even if we have gas availability, are they available to the generating plant as and when needed? Because that depends on the gas infrastructure, and that's number two. And three, historically, the gas and the power sector, because they're not integrated, there have been some degree of disconnection between them. There's improvement in connection, improvement in discussing about the problem, but the gas people may not have the same incentive to invest in energy supply.
Okay, Dr. Sam Amadi, you're former chairman of Nigeria Electricity Regulatory Commission. Thank you for joining us on TVC Breakfast.